Welcome to Time with the Word. This is Glenn Hawley, and I'm here today with Mark Miller. Mark is a professor of mathematics at York University. He is also one of our elders at East Hill and a person who loves the Word of God very much. So welcome, Mark.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Mark, I understand that you want to talk about one of the oft-forgotten cities of Israel today. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, our text for this week in our readings involved the book of 1 Samuel, the beginning of 1 Samuel, and sitting in the background there is a place called Shiloh. And before Jerusalem, while Jerusalem was still a pagan Jebusite hamlet, worship was alive and thriving for Yahweh in Shiloh. And it actually wound up there, the tabernacle wound up there under Joshua. And after it had been at like 40-something locations during their time in the wilderness, it finally had a home. And the Jews got quite loyal to Shiloh, to the point they came to the brink of civil war when they feared that the Transjordan tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh had built this big altar that they feared that they were going to worship at that altar instead of up in Shiloh. That they came to the brink of civil war, but they had a meeting in Shiloh.
In Shiloh, yeah.
And cooler heads prevailed, and an understanding was reached. But that just indicates the importance of the city in the background of the text of our readings for this week.
Well, the tabernacle was at Shiloh for hundreds of years, over 300 years.
About 350, I think. Yeah.
And so it is a significant location, not only for the tabernacle, but for Israel as a whole.
Indeed, that's true. First Samuel picks up at a very low point because, as has been mentioned on this podcast, Israel is in a downward spiral in the book of Judges.
Oh, terribly.
Terribly. And the worship in Shiloh still hangs on, because in Judges chapter 18, we have a mention of the tribe of Dan. Once they took their city up north and went into idolatry, it says they were in idolatry as long as the worship was in Shiloh. So it was still going on at the end of Judges at that time. So you get the idea coming into 1 Samuel that Eli is up there as a high priest. And he's a bit of a conflicted character in the Bible, but he's up there as high priest, just white-knuckling it, hanging on. And to make matters worse, his two sons in 1 Samuel 4 are called worthless. And they were causing problems. They were sleeping with the women at the entrance of the temple, and they were forcing their will on others. They were not good successors.
Sure, these are men who were priests themselves,
Yes.
and were in line to become high priest.
One thing that comes out is the Philistines are nipping at the heels more fiercely of Israel. And there's a war starting in chapter 4, and this is after Samuel knew the Lord, but the war is starting in chapter 4, and they are not faring very well, and they said, well, let's go get the Ark of the Covenant, which was in Shiloh. And it may disappoint and upset the doctrine of some, but the film Raiders of the Lost Ark got it wrong. An army which carries the Ark before it is not invincible, as Indiana Jones was assured by the federal agents in that film. Most of the time, it was a help. Around Jericho and several other times, it was a help.
Well, when God tells the people to carry the ark into battle, it's going to go well.
Yep. And but here they lose spectacularly in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 1 to 11. It says there was a very great slaughter. And this is, in the background here, you have modern archaeology has confirmed that Shiloh was burned and leveled around 1050 BC, which lines up perfectly with the biblical timeline.
Yes.
So that was the end of Shiloh. And
they think that because they have God in a box, that they're going to have victory if they take it into battle. But that's just using God as a prop,
yeah,
not God as their heart.
they were using the ark as like a talisman, a good luck
Yeah.
charm, right? In the meantime, 7 times in the chapters, 1 Samuel 6 and 7, it mentions in the narrative that the hand of Yahweh was at work.
Yes.
Even to the point that the Philistines in chapter 5 recognized it. Oh, this is the hand of the God of the Israelites that's at work here. When they saw their god Dagon getting knocked over, even they recognized it was the God of Israel at work. And so, how else was God of Israel at work? We have to go back to, or go forward, I guess, to Jeremiah.
Okay, talk about Jeremiah.
Because Jeremiah fills in what is not in the Samuel narrative.
For those who aren't familiar with the timeline, Jeremiah comes several hundred years after the destruction at Shiloh. You've had most of the kings of Israel and Judah in between.
Exactly.
And so how does Jeremiah relate to that?
Where it's about 400, he's ballpark, he was there at the time of the destruction of the temple, so that was 586 BC.
Yes.
This is 1050, so that's solid 450 years later. And as you said, after all the kings, the northern kingdom had gone into captivity with the Assyrians about 135 years earlier. And he, at the opening chapters of Jeremiah, he sets out his indictment. That's one of the things that prophets are in Scripture, is they are Yahweh's prosecutors.
All right.
They're covenant enforcers in some cases. And in 1 Samuel in Jeremiah chapter 7, you have the sermon at the temple gate. And as people are coming in the temple, he says, do not trust, and this is in Jeremiah 7, verse 4, do not trust in deceptive words, chanting, this is the temple of the Lord, this is the temple of the Lord, this is the temple of the Lord. For if you really correct your ways and deeds, you will act justly toward one another. And he goes on and talks about how they were not obeying. And near the end of that, jumping down to verse 12 in Jeremiah chapter 7, but go now to the place of Shiloh. He says, go look at Shiloh, or where Shiloh was.
Yes.
Where I first made a dwelling for my name. That was the first permanent location for his house, the tabernacle. And see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people, Israel. And jumping down a little further, and I have called to you, but you would not answer, in verse 13. Verse 14, therefore, what I did to Shiloh, I will now do to the house that bears my name. That would be the temple. The house in which you trust. The place that I gave you for your fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, then in the 6th century BC, he says, this is the same situation we had in Shiloh. And I'm prepared, it's going to break my heart, but I'm prepared to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The people's idea was, well, as long as the temple is here, we're safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a kid's game. I'm going to go back to the place of safety, and nobody can get me there.
Right.
And God says, oh, yeah? Go look at Shiloh and learn the lesson
Go
there.
look at Shiloh. And Shiloh never was very big. This is worth mentioning, is that it swelled over 1 million plus, some say 2 million, during the feasts and festivals. But it was mainly temple servants and priests that lived there permanently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that reminds me a little of the church today.
Okay, talk about that.
Because we have churches now that East Hill is full of worshipers of God and many great, great servants. Many behind the scenes that are never even seen, much less sometimes mentioned or appreciated, And And that kind of reminds me of the situation at Shiloh. You know, they had a lot of priests and servants there. But we have to guard ourselves in misplacing our trust, because we can say, oh, we're God's church, we're God's church, we're God's church.
Yes.
And in Jeremiah did not take his judgment speak to the kings and to the priests. They were often the recipients of the prophet's messages. In Jeremiah 7, that's at the temple gate. That's at the church house steps.
Yeah, he's talking to the people.
He's talking to you and me.
Yes.
And so you think about it, a city itself cannot be obedient or disobedient. It's the people in the city. And it's the same with a church. You know, although God talks about removing the lampstand of churches in Revelation, right? Chapter 2 and 3.
Sure.
He loves his church. He ransomed his son, or he gave his son to ransom the church, it says in Acts chapter 20. But he's not sentimental. He's long-suffering. He's patient. But that long-sufferingness of the Lord is best left untested.
It's not about formulas. It's not about words. It's not about the sign on the door. It's about the people inside and the hearts of the worshipers.
That's really the message for today. Is that you know, he he loves his church, and he loves people serving the church. He wants people to be involved, and sometimes our activity in the church and as church leaders, we sometimes have a lot to do that's in the church, and that's good. That's good, but
Sure.
it's necessary but not sufficient. He is looking for the hearts and the day-to-day obedience. You know, the other 6 days of the week is what the people in Jeremiah's time and the people in
Samuel's time.
were lacking. And God says, you want to know who destroyed Shiloh? I did. Yes, he did. But he is as faithful in his judgments as he is in his blessings.
That's right. He is not only the God of grace, but he's the God of judgment. Well, let's take the lesson of Shiloh and learn from it and be a holy people for God and give our hearts fully to him. This has been Time with the Word, and I thank you for being here today.